This is Washington Policy Center's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly of Education. We break down the latest in what's happening in education policy for Washington State and how to create the best future for parents and students. Welcome to this episode. My name is Donald Kimball. I'm here with our Education Director, Liv Finna. We're going to be bringing you the latest in education, starting with national news and then moving to Washington State. So, Liv, take us through the movements of education nationally. What developments have we seen?
Well, this week, once again, exciting developments on the school choice front. The first thing I noticed was that the governor of Georgia is now calling for universal school choice. That's a big state. That's significant. There are other states like Missouri, Tennessee, and Alabama that are now calling for school choice. It's very exciting. And then the people who watched the debate on Wednesday night between Governor DeSantis and Governor Haley would have noticed that the first words out of Governor DeSantis's mouth was that he was bragging about the universal school choice bill that he passed over the objections of the state teachers union in Florida. And of course, that is one of the most comprehensive school choice programs in the country. So that when people start celebrating the benefits to families, then you know that this is an idea that whose time has come. So that's nationally, it's continuing to move forward. Very exciting.
Awesome. And I believe that there's some movement petition-wise in both Oregon and Washington, potentially. Is that right?
Yes. So I've been following, there's an incredible lady down in Oregon called Donna Kreitzberg, who is a retired lawyer, and she has been leading the effort to gather signatures to put it on the ballot, to put a school choice initiative on the ballot this November in Oregon. And I heard from someone else today that she may have gotten the signature she needs. Now, I have to verify that. I'm not certain, but this is moving ahead in Oregon. And then, of course, significantly for us here in Washington, I heard that the organization Let's Go Washington, led by Brian Haywood, which has successfully submitted 6 initiative measures to the legislature just this last month on other topics, is thinking about pursuing a school choice measure for the ballot here in November in Washington State. So I just heard about this. I don't know if it's true yet, but if that happens, wow. That's all I can say. That's so great. It's here on our doorstep here in Washington State.
Even if it doesn't end up materializing this November, it does seem like the energy and the movement behind it is here to stay. Even in the last legislative session, I believe, there were bills introduced that would have moved forward with a school choice program, and they got even further than we would have expected maybe in another year. And so the fact that we're hearing it from the legislative level, that garners excitement that maybe we're hearing it on the ground level. Again, maybe not this year. It would be exciting if so, but even still, it's great to see the momentum moving in that direction.
Well, it's definitely, it's here when the state superintendent of public instruction led off this week with his announcement to the state, his state of education address. He led off with 10 minutes worth of attacking people for running down the reputation of the public schools and trying to privatize them, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so he's clearly afraid of it. So it's making headway. And it's a shame that he talks like that with such fear-mongering falsehoods, because it is very possible and to have both a well-funded traditional public school system and a system that gives parents access to school choice. This happens in enlightened democracies across the world, in Europe, in Asia, in Australia. People have access to school choice. They see it as a right. Parents see it as a right. And that will come here, regardless of the fear-mongering done by the people protecting their established monopoly.
Well, kudos to you for having laid the foundation and groundwork in many cases for the school choice movement here in Washington. It's one of those things where, we work on an issue for a long time, and seeing it sort of in the public eye and on our doorstep now, it's really exciting because you've been in this fight for a long time.
Well, thanks, but I'm just following what other brilliant people are doing in other states. It's just great. No,
well, that's the beautiful thing, right? Exchange of ideas.
I remember arguing for this when my children were little. All right, this has been around a long, long time, and since Milton Friedman brought it up in the 1950s as a way to fix public education, give parents school choice. So it's amazing. It's 2024, and it is here. It is here, and it's not going away. And it was the COVID school shutdowns that opened everyone's eyes that the system of public education is self-interested. It's an industrial complex, essentially. It's not serving parents well. It's not. It's dodging its responsibility in many ways to educate children, and so parents have to take control, and they're doing that. And I did the numbers this morning, and maybe we're getting off topic a little bit, Donald, but I thought I did a very interesting calculation because someone asked me a question for another interview. How many people are actually, what is the percentage of the total enrollment of students that are now using alternative education models? And I did a quick calculation, and it used to be that only about 10% of the nation's children were enrolled in private school, and that 90% were in traditional public schools. Well, that's no longer so. We're talking, I did a quick calculation, the growth of homeschools, the growth of public charter schools, which is an alternative within the public school system, and then the growth of school choice is now leading to about another 10% of, so 10% are in these alternative models, 10% are in private schools. That means only 80% are in traditional public schools. And now with the growth of universal school choice bills, you're going to see that 80% erode dramatically further because, for example, in the state of Florida, 70,000 people has signed up for their universal school choice bill in the last 6 months. So these numbers are going to like skyrocket now. We're going to get we may get to a point where there's 50% of the kids in traditional public schools and 50% of the kids in school choice models. That's so exciting.
That would be a great thing because, as many of us recognize, monopolies do not necessarily breed innovation. And when you have competition introduced, you have alternate choices, then people have to actually compete and serve the interests of the students better in order to attract customers, essentially. So,
and there are more and more studies coming out showing the benefit to the traditional system, that the traditional system responds to school choice by improving the services it offers.
Exactly.
And you probably noticed that the new president of Argentina is talking about introducing a school choice voucher for families. So it's just like all over the place.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of it being all over the place, let's focus in and see what we've got going on in Washington. You testified on a couple of bills this past week, and there's other things to look forward to a little bit. So let's talk about which bills did you testify on and how did that go?
Okay, so I testified on a bill I think it was 8207, to remove the constitutional taxpayer protection provision, which requires voters the 60% of voters to approve a long-term debt for school construction bonds. Okay, the current law requires 60% approval, and the people within the system are frustrated by this because they think it should be a 50% approval, and that should be the threshold to pass a long-term debt on school bonds. And I testified that this is not a good idea because it actually provides a way to hold school districts accountable for proposing school bond measures that are reasonable and within the capacity of the local community to pay for. And often you have these school districts desiring to build a Taj Mahal, and when the proposal fails, they come back with a more reasonable measure that the public can afford. This happened in the Peninsula School District. This just recently happened in the South Whidbey School District. And so this is a good check on the spending of the schools. But it's also a more serious matter for the people who need access to housing. Really, it's a homelessness issue. Okay, the cost of housing is driven up by this long-term debt that has been imposed by people to pay for the cost of schools. That's part of the cost of your property taxes, and many people are being priced out of their housing because they can't afford the property taxes that have been imposed by this long-term debt. These are 30-year bonds, and which means that people today are voting to impose debt on their children and their grandchildren. And like a mortgage, this takes a greater number of people to decide whether we can really do this, we can really afford this, or we're really going to impose long-term debt on our communities. And that's why it has this higher threshold. We've had this for 70 years. in our Constitution. It has worked well. If a school bond measure fails once, it can try again and make it more reasonable, and they pass. And the numbers show that well over 60% of school bond measures actually pass. So this is the idea, the statement that we need a 50% threshold to pass a school bond measure is just a falsehood. And I showed this with my testimony and my reporting on this. The other bills that I testified on was 5882, which would cut the ratio of teachers in the public schools. And I have strong, that whole thing is ridiculous, because we already have a low ratio of teachers in our public schools. Of the total public school employment, only 50% are actually teachers. And what they're trying to do is add non-teachers to the staff and reduce that ratio even further, which is clearly not central to the mission of the schools. We need to have, if anything, in an emergency like we have, we should add teachers to the school payrolls and provide individual tutoring for kids. So I testified on that. And then the third bill that I testified was on the bill to provide free meals to kids, whether in the public schools, whether or not their families can afford it. And I think that's just an insult to parents, because the schools are saying essentially, we don't trust you to feed your children. And this lack of trust between the state and the parents is leading to an exodus of families from public education. 45,000 have pulled their kids out of the public schools. This is just an insult, and it divides families from their children, and inserts the state into the provision of something very fundamental, and that is food. Okay, so I oppose that bill. So
okay, let's talk a little bit real quick in the last couple minutes we have here. During your testimony on 5882, you actually got interrupted, as I understand it, and you were challenged on this idea that somehow hiring non-teachers would upset the balance of the ratio of teachers to non-teaching staff. Now, I'm not a math major. I didn't study math in university or anything like that, but I think I have a grasp on what ratios are. And so it seems to me that if they are trying to hire a bunch more non-teaching staff without having an equal proportion of hiring teaching staff, then no matter how you spin it, the ratio is going to increase non-teaching staff to teachers. Am I missing something here, or how did you respond to that question in testimony?
I just like you said, my testimony was interrupted by the chair, which is not fair to start with. And she clearly didn't understand the word ratio, I think I have to say, because a ratio by definition is the proportion of the whole. And if you're going to increase one segment of the whole, the ratio of non-teachers, you're going to decrease the ratio of teachers. And so that's just clear math. So it's okay. She's under a lot of pressure. I don't blame her. But she should have waited to ask me the question at the end of my testimony. That's only respectful. And there was a lot of discussion on Twitter about how that was disrespectful to me. I've given a minute and a half to testify, and the chair interrupts me. And it's okay. We got the point across, and she's a nice lady, and she's trying very hard. But she knows that it's wrong to cut the ratio of teachers in the public education.
This question comes to mind because it feels like every time there is a crisis with education funding, or at least a manufactured crisis, the first thing that happens is they put teachers sort of on the chopping block. They'll say things like, well, we might have to incorporate, mass teacher layoffs unless we get these budgetary demands. That's what it feels like has happened. And I say this not only as just an outside observer, but as someone who has friends who are teachers in the system whose jobs were being threatened by this very specifically, even though they were bright, young, energetic, excited teachers who love their students doing innovative things. And so it's very frustrating. It seems to me that this is one of those kinds of bills that would then divert funding from the budget to non-teaching staff. And then once they say, oh, look, we're not going to have enough money to pay teachers again, they use that to garner sympathy to get more money, even though really the money is going to non-teaching staff. That's not essential. That's not critical. That's not helping the mission of public schools educate children. Any last sort of thoughts on that before we end?
That is exactly right. And prepare for more of that. Okay, prepare for more of that to happen, because they got $3 billion in federal funds that are running out, and that's what they're going to, and they spent it on, increasing the salaries of non-teaching staff and hiring more staff. And now they're going to say, we're going to have to cut the jobs of teachers. only 50% of the public school staff are teachers. So if they have to cut jobs, they don't have to cut one teacher. And they this is a game they play, and the public falls for it now all the time because the newspapers don't expose this as a fraud on the people. And it's just like they do on all these other budget fights. Like, we're going to cut fire service if you don't increase your property taxes to pay for the fire department. Well, if the priority of the city is to provide fire protection, then that should be the top priority, and everything else should come after that, not their little agenda. So this is just another example of that. It's just wrong, and that gives another reason for school choice, right?
Yes, exactly right. Well, that's a great note to end on. We're just at our time here. So thank you so much, Lee. Make sure to tune in next week. We're going to have further updates for you as the session continues. Stay tuned.
Thank you, Donald.